This episode was sponsored by MPB, the world's largest online platform for used photo and video kit. Visit mpb.com. Hey folks, in this interview, I get to sit down with the real deal himself, Nikon Ambassador, Mr. Joe McNally. This is TWiP. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today, I say this all the time, but today I really mean it. I get to sit down with a photographer who has influenced legions of photographers out there with his work ethic, with his story, the lighting, just the knowledge of photography. It goes on and on and on. Joe McNally is one of those photographers, like I was telling Joe in our little quote green room, he's one of those photographers where you mention his name amongst other photographers and an eerie hush falls on the crowd, like Darth Vader entered the room, and there's a force there that that shall not be challenged. Joe McNally, the title of his book that we're going to talk about is The Real Deal, but Joe McNally is literally the real deal when it comes to photography, photojournalism, commercial photography, all this stuff. Joe, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, man. How the heck are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Frederick. Thank you very much for the many kind words there. Should I start breathing like Darth Vader? Should I, just...
You should. You should. Frederick, I am your father. Yeah, there you go.
Frederick, the force is strong with you.
Thank you. It is. Yeah. This is great. This is good. So, like I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about this a little bit. This is your book. It's out now. It's called The Real Deal. Subtitled Field Notes from the Life of a Working Photographer, Joe McNally. Who's this book for, Joe? Is this book for the average photographer that wants to get better at photography? Is it a glimpse into your life and the trials and tribulations of some of the stories that happen behind the scenes as a photographer? What's the book about?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, my editor and I actually struggled with it. When I was writing and we were discussing it, it's like, well, okay, what is this book exactly? Because so many photo books are like straight line narratives to a destination, like, okay, how to pose better, how to do something better. This book is not that. It's not a super highway of directed information. I liken it more to a country road. It takes an amble, it's, or a ramble, I guess you should say, and a meander could also be applied through the life of a working photographer. And there's a lot of information for photographers of all, different genres and stages of their life, be they professional or amateur. It's honest. And it talks about the ups, the downs, the failures, the successes, the strategies, etc. And the material is, generally speaking, presented anecdotally. In other words, couched in the story of a location shot, or the story of a failure, or the story of some shoot that was going off the rails and then you pulled it back on. Lots of lessons photographically, not only about the technique of photography, but the life of photography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's we were talking about that a little bit as well. Just the on the life side of photography over the years, being a good photographer and going after the shots or going to the shot, skating to where the puck is going to be, that takes a toll, right? I mean, it's not being a photographer, especially when operating at your level. It's not an easy gig. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like what kind of wear and tear gets put on you as a photographer, constantly going out there and being on the road and getting these great shots and all that pressure?
There's a lot of pressure associated across the board. Pressure from the client, to pressure to do well. Obviously, financial pressure. Your next gig is never completely certain. And then there's the physicality of being a photographer, going location to location, airplane after airplane, gear, hauling, moving, climbing. All of that sort of stuff, is perhaps not talked about all that much, but it's a very real presence. Photography is this thing. It's an art and a craft, right? And it winds itself around your life in very powerful and hopefully positive ways. There's lots of folks out there like, well, I do this during the week, but on the weekend, I go out and I do motocross or I
Hmm.
sail a boat or something like that. That's how I get my yayas out. I think for many photographers, most, I would imagine, it's this is it, 7 days a week. We photograph to work, we photograph to relax. And I always, I've shot dance, photography for a long time, in the background of other things I've done. And I always remember there's a famous quote from George Balanchine, the legendary choreographer. He always said, I don't need dancers who want to dance. I want dancers who need to dance.
Mm.
And I think for photographers, we need to photograph, whether we're in repose or working hard. We run when others walk. We're working on weekends when others have time off, and we love doing it because it's a very, very passionate endeavor.
You think that's a learned trait? Is it learned? Can you learn to have that fire and the desire to have that pull to go out and create photos? Or if you don't have it, you just don't have it, and you should find something else to do?
Wow, that's a Frederick. You're good. You're good. You
It's
know.
what I do, Joe. It's what I do.
It's like I'm going to quote De Niro and what is it? Analyze this. You, my friend, you got a gift. You got a gift. Um, you know, um,
I
but
need a clip of that. You got a gift.
I think that for me, and you can extrapolate this in any way you want. When I first really seriously picked up a camera, I knew immediately. It felt comfortable in my hands, and I thought to myself, I don't know, without even really knowing the first thing about it, I thought to myself, I can do this. And I don't know how I felt that, but it was intuitive and it felt natural. The camera just felt natural in my hands. And there's also the other kind of underlying thing is that I instantly, or in my first classes photographically, I realized, wow, this could keep me out of an office
Yeah.
because I'm,
Yeah.
I'm no good in an office. I'm just not an office person. I drift. I'm like a balloon. My wife is constantly reeling me back in. Um, and the can you learn to be passionate about something? Yes, I think you can. I think it stems from life experience, and it stems from um, maybe many situations I've met with people who have taken workshops with me or something, is that they want to turn on another side of their brain, and once that is turned on via the making of pictures, then they're full bore. They can't shut that back down. So yeah, I think once you're bitten by the bug, there's no turning back.
And then once you're bitten by that bug, right? And then that's just the beginning, right? So how do you get to the point where you're creating the level of work? I mean, obviously you gotta, gotta get your shutter finger kind of exercise and take lots of shots and understand what you're doing. But the concept of the photos, let's take commercial out of it, right? So it's not a client that says, hey Joe, we need a shot of this car on the salt flats doing this. That's out of it. If you're just Joe McNally and you just want to go do some shots because you're feeling that burning desire, where does that come from? Does Joe have a list of like, okay, when I have some time, I'm going to do this shot. And when I have more time, I'm going to do this shot. Or is it more serendipitous? You're watching a movie and you're like, hey, that would make a great shot. I'm going to execute that. Like where do the ideas come from that aren't driven by, commercial?
Yeah, that's again good line of inquiry, really, because everybody's process is different. Mine is not a particularly organized process at all. No, I don't have check marks in a book or anything like that. I ruminate. I imagine the phrase "what if." What if we put a camera on this, or what if I was able to get over there, or. So you start with the imaginative process, the kind of wild ass thought, and then say, wow, maybe I can make a picture of that. The frontispiece to the book, it's just a blank page with two sentences on it in bold type, and it says, I imagined a life, and then I took pictures of it.
Mm.
So I have a pretty active imagination. I read a lot of comic books when I was a kid. I went to 5 different grammar schools, which is actually good preparation to become a photographer because you're always the new kid.
Yeah.
And I read epics and adventures and fantasies and stories and comic books. And I know that influenced my color palette, my camera point of view, heroic poses and action and strong, vivid color. Sometimes I wish I could quiet it down, but it just that never happens. I just chew on ideas, and sometimes things come from, as you say, I mentioned comic books, but also movies. I remember I saw Water for Elephants when Reese Witherspoon laid down on an elephant in the movie, I believe it was. And I went to Lynn, my amazingly patient studio manager, who's been with me for 30 years, and she's a marvelous producer. She's actually working on 2 large projects for us now, which we'll shoot in March, assembling the bits and pieces. And I went to her and I said, I just made a screen grab of it. And I said, this feel, you see the feel, the light? And next thing you know, we were in Florida, and thankfully we had a big budget job, and we built a circus tent, an old time circus tent.
Wow.
And that's where that came from, was a split second. And sometimes on location too, you can be, walking with the usual scout, and something just glimmers in your eye, like, oh, and you can't, your head gets pulled for a second. And it's like that's where we're starting, right over there.
Are you the photographer that always has a camera with you no matter what? Like you're out to dinner, there's a photographer or camera sitting on the chair next to you?
No, I take it with me frequently, but not all the time.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talked a little bit about, sort of in the early days of, I think we weren't recording. We were talking about the old SB24 speed lights. And I remember distinctly, I don't know if you remember this, but there was, I think it was a video or a photo series of you lighting a jet or something with a bunch of speed lights. And it was a video, because I remember that was the first time I heard you use the term voice activated light stand, which is so bringing it to 2022, where we are now. That was back in the teens, right? We're in 2022 now. How has that stuff changed? How has your approach to lighting and light changed with the evolution of artificial lighting solutions like the SB series and whatever else we have available to us today?
Yeah, the progress has been astonishing. The technology we have available to us now as photographers is off the charts. And we live in this golden age. I mean, Nikon just came out with the Z9. I had D850s. I still have them. I thought, well, this is it. This is the best camera I'm ever going to use. And then the Z9 comes out, and that's a better camera. More rounded technologically, more tuned up. I don't even know the exact words to express it, but we have these cameras now that we can single-handedly express our imaginations in ways that we simply could not have done back in the days of F2s and F3s, or certainly would have taken a lot of work and a lot of guesswork. That's the thing that impresses me about the technology. You just mentioned the SB24. That was an era of TTL flash technology that was very uncertain. And now we have the SB5000, and we have the Pro Photos, the A10s, the B10 Plus X's, and all this TTL fast recycle, radio controlled stuff. So the certainty of approach is so much higher now. The confidence that you can go out into the field with, that you will wrestle this thing to the ground because you've got these technology tools that are at your service. That's pretty amazing. I mean, shooting film, 36 exposure film, you wrap that cassette up and, with Kodachrome and National Geographic, I'd wait, 2 or 3 weeks before I would get word from my editor that everything looked good or something like that. Now that instantaneous access to amazing technology, I think, has bolstered the confidence of photographers everywhere.
Yeah. Do we not, as photographers, do we not know what we're missing? Like you mentioned with the D850, right? That was it. I remember back in the day, it was that after it was, I think that my first pro level camera was a Nikon F3. You remember those?
Oh
So
yeah.
I had with the screw on battery grip, or the motor drive and all that on there.
Yep.
Yeah. So I thought that camera was, how could it get better than this? It's amazing. Look at all this stuff that this camera can do. And now we have the Z9. What's next? Like, what are we missing? Seeing into the future, or being able to capture dark matter? Like, what are we missing in these cameras? I mean, obviously focusing speeds can get better and all that, but are there any features that you just wish you had that aren't there in the Z9?
I have to say, people might look at this, with askance, or maybe say, oh, he's just blowing smoke.
Yeah.
I'm not really. I'm a bit of a simpleton when it comes to cameras.
Mm.
There's a very famous British war photographer named Donald McCullin, a member of Magnum, and I've always admired his work. He said one of the best things ever about cameras. He said, I only use a camera like I use a toothbrush. It gets the job done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now the Z9 is a hell of a toothbrush, every iteration of the technology, I say to myself, how much better is this going to get? And sure, there's little refinements that you could maybe add to the present packages that we have, but I don't choose to dwell on that. There's a lot of, crying, and, well, not crying. What's the right word to say? Just like debate,
Yeah.
and
Pixel peeping, complaining, all that.
back and forth. Yeah, you name it. And that's fine. People get involved in the technology, and the shape of the pixel does not matter to me. The end result, or the ultimate mission of photography, is to tell a good story. And no matter how much technology we have, that's still a very hard mission. And that's what I choose to focus on. And so the Z9 has a roster of things that I'm still just getting used to, that are enabling me to hopefully press forward and tell good stories. So I got no complaints. I really got no complaints.
Well, so the flip side of that is, since you have that Z9, what are some of the favorite things, or some of the more surprising things that are present in that body that you weren't expecting? Is it ergonomics? Is it the menu? Is it focusing, tracking? Like, what are some things in there that a Joe McNally or someone operating at your level was surprised by?
Sure. You mentioned ergonomics. I mean, I shot the Tokyo Games. I shot them all on D6, which is flagship DSLR. And I've always liked a robust camera in my hands, especially when I'm using long glass. The Z6, Z7 series of cameras are wonderful cameras, amazing technology in a small form factor. But you pop that onto the back of a 600, there's not a lot to hang on to. So I was really happy that the Z9 is kind of this marriage, really, of DSLR flagship build with mirrorless technology. There's a lot to handle with this camera. It gives you leverage. It gives you feel very connected to it and the way it's designed. The other thing is, apart from the autofocus is astonishing. The eye detect is remarkable. All those things that you've heard about, on the airwaves about photography of late. But to me, a real revelation was never losing sight of my subject. The mechanical shutter is gone. And so no matter how you are exposing, you're banging along at, 20 frames a second, which is another unheard of number as far as I'm concerned. And you never lose sight of your subject. It's amazing, and I find that to be valuable, not only out there in the field, but even in the studio, because you're able to see those nuances, those split seconds in between the moment, and your subjects are right there with you all the time. And I thought that was the first time I had ever experienced that in all these years of shooting. And that was kind of it seems like a small thing, but it's a revelation to me.
Yeah. There's so many little bits. Like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I recently picked up the Nikon Z6 II, which I'm in that sort of honeymoon period with, and understanding the camera, being kind of diving into it and understanding what its limitations are and capabilities. It's just the system is just, it's just magical when it comes to still photography. I can't say enough about it. And that 24 to 70 f2.8 is what I have mounted on it. So very excited about that. When you dive in and or in other words, let me rephrase that. So if I'm a photographer, I'm coming to you, and I've read the book, I've been following Joe McNally, I've been on the website, joemcnally.com. And I want to do work similar to what you're doing or operate at your level. And I'm new, I'm just getting into this. How would you instruct me, as a mentor? Would you say, go get X camera, take these courses at this website, go take a trip and do a workshop? What are the steps to go from, I'm really interested in photography, I want to get better in a Joe McNally direction? How would I go about doing that?
Accept the fact, first off, that it's a long road, and patience is required. And then identify what really motivates you. Are you motivated by the human face? Are you motivated by sports? Are you motivated by documenting the joys of families and weddings? Where are your interests? The other thing that I have always advocated and has been powerful for me is to do a lot of reading and dive into the history of this field and look at a lot of pictures that have gone before. I have a very large library of photo books at home, and I find them an ongoing source of inspiration. And so I look at some of those truly amazing photographers and the work that they did in the years that have gone by. And that has formed a base for me of kind of what motivates me visually. Where do I want to go in this realm? Because, you're by and large talking about a freelance industry. So, I always liken my Joe McNally photography that is old jalopy. It doesn't go very fast, but I can drive it wherever I want. That's a beautiful thing, and if I want to pursue dance photography, if I want to pursue special effects, if I want to pursue sports, I can collect myself and drive in that direction. So starting small, being patient, and the 10,000 hours rule is very real here. The more you do this, the better you will get. And education is not to be underestimated. There's educational alternatives all over the place, apart from going to a university or a long and expensive program. There are options for education. The Kelby Group, for instance, has lots of information there, well presented. There are photographers who run consistent sort of lessons. Dave Black has his workshops at the ranch. He has an archive. David Hobby at Strobist, if you're interested in Flash, I think still has his archive of I think it's called Boot Camp, Flash Boot Camp. Yep. So, the basics are important. I firmly believe that. The automated cameras will just run you into the ground. So you have to be careful of that, because you take it out of the box and wow, I'm making pictures. I got this thing on P and I'm pointing it at things and everything looks pretty good. Okay, let's calm down. You gotta know basics. You gotta have a firm, foundation if you want to take this and build it into a real satisfying career that has emotional resonance and a power to it. Shooting one picture nowadays that's good, anybody can do it. Literally, anybody can do it. The technology is right there. But shooting year after year and producing a seaworthy collection of pictures, editorially powerful, things that people notice, things that people pay attention to, and telling good stories year after year after year is a long, tough slog. And you have to get ready for that.
Yeah. You're scaring me, Joe. I'm going to put my camera down. All this work. What's this work stuff you're talking about? Nobody's told me there was work involved. He says, press the shutter and be done with it, right?
Yeah. No, but it's joyous. It's joyous. Yeah. We are joyful versions of Sisyphus. We will never get the rock to the top of the hill, but there's real joy in trying.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love it.
especially that one picture, that you might shoot, thousands of frames over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. I'm just speculating, and you just get down on yourself, like none of this stuff is any good. But then you can turn a corner, literally, and there's good light, and maybe there's some kids, playing soccer or something in the street, and you just kind of put your camera to your eye, and it's absolutely magic.
Yeah.
And you can grab those pictures almost like they're talismans. They're like, it's like, oh yeah, I can really do this, and that becomes the wind in your sails for many moons thereafter.
Yeah. One thing that comes up a lot on This Week in Photo is the idea or the question of specialization. And should you specialize as a photographer? Should you pick a genre and stick to it, or should light be your genre? In other words, light falls on the Olympics, I can be an Olympic photographer, or light falls on dance, I could be a dance photographer, or light falls on product, I could be a product photographer. I understand f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO and composition. Therefore, I can apply that to a variety of subjects. That's one mindset. The other mindset is do one thing, be known as being the best at that one thing, burn a hole in it like a magnifying glass on a leaf, and you will be successful. Where do you fall on that? Should photographers specialize, or should they generalize? Hard questions, Joe. Hard questions.
You didn't tell me about this going in here, Frederick. You didn't say I'd be like pinned like a butterfly to the wall, like
I'm in
Joe,
Oprah mode, man. Come on.
photography.
I'm the Oprah of photography. Come on.
No, there's, and this sounds like a dodge. It's not really. Everybody's path is unique.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a generalist. I remain resolutely a generalist because I really don't have any other choice at this point. So that is, I do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been interested in the kind of global, offerings, like, oh yeah, like, I'll go to sea, and with a ship, and that'd be cool. And then I'll climb this building, or then I'll shoot this portrait, and then I'll do some studio work. So I've managed to put together this kind of patchwork quilt of a career. It's not been a steady, straight line at all. But nowadays are different. I used to advocate for young photographers. The very first thing you should do is go get a job in a newspaper. Mm-hmm. Become a staff photographer at a newspaper, because you'll go through hell and you'll get thrown lots of jobs that stink, and you'll have to innovate your way through. It really gets your grounding going. Your pins are under you. As a newspaper shooter, it's a great learning tool. That's not available at the level it used to be. So now I think identifying a certain interest and going after that interest is perhaps more the way to go, because if you jump into weddings, for instance, and say, well, I'll do a few weddings a year, you're up in the wedding market against people who are doing lots of weddings a year,
right,
who are passionate about it and very, very good at it. So being a part-time approach to something where someone else, your competition, is driving that train like crazy 7 days a week, you're probably not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to choose at this point in this marketplace, I think you have to choose a direction and really, really apply yourself to becoming as best as you can be in that particular genre.
Yeah. That goes to the next thing would be the importance of social and letting that drive your work and drive the things. In other words, we've had these commercials or these conversations on This Week in Photo where some photographers will say the work that they produce is directly related to the response that they get on Instagram or wherever they're posting. So you're kind of shooting for the thumbs up or shooting for the likes. Because if I feed the koi pond this kind of bread and they go crazy, but not so much when I feed them this kind of bread, I'm going to feed them more of that, and that drives the work. It's valid, right? Because if you have a gallery show and no one shows up, then that's one thing. But if you do a gallery show of a different kind of work and everyone shows up, obviously you should do more of that kind of work. What do you think as an artist, taking all commercial and money out of it, but as an artist, how should photographers kind of guide themselves? Should they be influenced by social and, public opinion, or should it just be, you know what, this is my singular vision. I am an artist and I feel like I need to do a photo story on X, and that's what I'm going to do. What do you think?
I think your best pictures will result from you following your nose and your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that old damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead kind of thing,
Yeah.
And I think if you craft your, everybody plays the social game. I think it's a necessary thing, and you might be out there on social media as being, a presence that is encouraging or offering up a variety of different work. And you have to accept the vagaries of that some people will like it and some people will not. I think the bottom line is do good work, present good work. If at the end of the day, you can feel good about what you achieved and what you posted and what you shot, then that's a good day. Jay Maisel always used to tell me he would do a corporate job for lots and lots of money. And then he would come back to the bank where he lived down on the Bowery for many years, and he'd go up to his roof and just shoot sunsets just to feel clean. So I think your photographic heart should be preserved at all costs. Yeah. Your enthusiasm, your love for this. And you can't let maybe naysayers or lack of attendance kind of destroy that.
I also think about like self projects, and you may know Julianne Cost from Adobe. Julianne and I had a conversation a while back about the importance of self projects and assigning yourself self projects, not only for portfolio building, but also as an exercise to get better as an artist. Do you subscribe to that as well? And are you giving yourself self projects from time to time? If so, what kind?
Yes, what I hopefully can do is I decide on quote unquote a project, and I write proposals and I try to monetize the idea and get some backing for it, so that I can more fully get, because I think kind of ambitiously, I guess you could say, when I'm dreaming up ideas, and I can't self-fund everything I do. Occasionally I do, occasionally I'm just saying, heck with it. I'm going to go do this, whether, anybody wants to pay me for it or not. And there are threads that you can establish that you can revisit over time. Or a really powerful thing is to incorporate your interests into an ongoing funded project. I used to do that with Geographic. I had a story for Geographic once on human performance. It was their millennial celebration of the human body that coincided with the Australia Olympics down in Sydney. And I photographed athletes and, Olympians, et cetera. But I also was able to, because my editor gave me the leeway, I was able to incorporate other sort of whimsical ideas into the idea of performance. Dance, for instance, I feel is a very elevated state of human performance. So I did a dance photograph that was not assigned to me, but Geographic funded it, and they loved it, and they published it. I wanted to illustrate strength and bodybuilding, and I thought, well, coiled strength, how could I illustrate coiled strength? So I rented, you can do this in Los Angeles, I rented two 18-foot Burmese pythons. And I got the number 3 bodybuilder in the world at the time, Chris Cormier, to come into the studio. And we shot it in the studio with this giant snake wrapped around him, which he was sort of dubious about, but he did it. And Geographic ran that as well. A total surprise. I didn't even tell my editor I was shooting them. So I think if that's maybe nirvana, is if you can find a genre of work that brings you places that you're potentially passionate about. Do a workshop or something, and then spend a couple extra days and really direct yourself into something that you really want to do. There's all sorts of ways of doing it, but bottom line is, yes, you have to feed your eye. And that requires sometimes you just stepping up and driving your own project and funding it yourself.
Oh, I love that. I was trying to write that down before you finish. Feed your eye. I'm going to use that. That's great. I'll wrap up with this, Joe. And I know a lot of photographers. Photographers. I think part of the DNA structure is talking about gear and what are you shooting with? What lens did you use to shoot that with? What app did you use to process that? Where are you posting it? All those sorts of things. I'm not so much curious about that. I'm more curious about your approach to going out on an assignment. And is it, slot one, which is Joe has his current 22 loadout of gear, a bag, maybe a backup version identical of that bag, but you have a bag of stuff that you take with you. And with that bag and what's in that bag, you can accomplish a Joe McNally level of work? Or is it more A-team style where you're going out on a mission and you go into your sort of matrix room of weapons and you pick the right things for that particular assignment. And when you come back, you put them back on the shelf and go, what does it look like in Joe McNally world?
Frederick, I think you and I are in the same boat. We've both seen way too many movies.
I know, totally.
I get jobs that are big and small, over the lot. You showed a few images of the Z9 camera, the marketing campaign out on El Mirage, and that's a big job. Lots of gear, lots of rental gear, Winnebago's crew of maybe a dozen or so, talent, hair, makeup, styling, you name it. That's at that level, but I don't work at that level all the time. I did a thing for a camera store recently where I did a series of images and I called it a walk with one light because I wanted to drive home the point that you don't need a lot of gear. And so I just took an interesting subject, and we walked around New York City with one light, and it was fun. So I think what you have to do is tailor your pack to the job at hand. Yeah. I mean, my basics are always that I have, at least 2 cameras, sometimes more. The holy trinity of lenses, 14, 24, 2470, 70-200, that covers a lot of the bases. And then there's other ones that would factor in as well. But, a small measure of small flash. And then, I use Profoto for the bigger flash, if you will. The B10 pluses are excellent units. And so, if we go out into the road with 4 or 5 bags of stuff, I pretty much feel we can get just about anything done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the 4 or 5 bags of stuff for Joe McNally whittles down to 1 bag for Frederick Van Johnson. 1 bag with a couple things in it that, we make it work. I guess the final kind of landing gear down question would be around how this works in your world. Your world is different than most photographers, I would argue, that aren't operating at a sort of a high commercial level. But on a post-production side of things, once a job is done, let's say it's one of your self-assigned yet funded, self-assignment projects. Who's doing the post-production on that? Is it Joe McNally from shutter click all the way through to final delivery? Or do you have a team you hand it off to that kind of understands the kind of look that you want and are tuned in and they can pull that out? How does that work after the shutter click?
Well, for many years, I had my crew chief, Michael Calley, just left right before the pandemic, fell in love, got engaged and married now. It's wonderful. He lives down in Virginia. Nice. And so then the pandemic hit. So I haven't hired a new crew chief or a new first assistant. But Calley was very good at retouching. And so I relied on him for that. But the beauty, small silver lining, let's call it that, of the pandemic was time at home, where I really learned a lot about Capture One. And I feel very comfortable with that program. So now, like the book that you showed there, The Real Deal, I did a lot of the retouching on those pictures myself, which is a newfound for me because I never really paid too much attention to retouching, and Photoshop for me was always the deep end of the pool. If we are doing fashion, where we need an elevated skill set, then yes, I farm that out professionally, and we use someone who really knows what they are doing, who can do skin work, which is absolutely beyond my skill set.
Okay, that makes sense. Capture One.
Yeah, and we use Solstice retouching. Just amazing, very talented, very talented,
I know those
and
folks. Yeah.
yeah, and great relationship, and yeah, that really tuned in to. We have a lot of discussion, but yeah, like that fine detail work on skin, fashion. That's an art form unto itself, and I
It
don't
is.
approach.
Yeah, you remember back in the day, imagine doing skin work without Capture One or Photoshop. That I can't imagine how those magicians made that work happen back then, because that was, it was something else. It's something else. So Joe, I want to let's wrap up with what's next for Joe McNally. What's the next trip? What's the next project? Where are you taking that Z9 next on the planet?
Well, I got a big job in March that we're assembling right now, and the bits and pieces are coming together production wise. And hopefully, I have a Zoom this week with an ad agency for a fairly sizable pharma shoot. TBD, we'll see what happens. But in terms of excursions and knowing where I'm going next, wine country.
Oh, that's my
Yeah,
neighborhood. Yeah, Napa.
yeah, going out to Napa and in April, Mayish time, and have 2 weeks out there. First week of those workshops are full, but the second week has a few openings. So come on out. We're going to do some lighting. We're going to do some landscape work, and we will have a wonderful time. Because
Yeah.
I just came out of the Amazon rainforest. I was in Ecuador for the last 2 weeks, and it was beautiful. It was wonderful, fantastic group of people, fantastic trip. But wine country will be, let's call it, a little more accessible
Yeah.
than, than the
Yeah.
Amazon River,
Yeah,
and
fewer animals out there too, I'm thinking.
easier going.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of great learning, and we got that. It's on our website, listed on our website. So
Okay. Excellent. All right, Joe McNally, I'll leave it right there. Thank you for doing this. Thanks for coming on, and congratulations on The Real Deal, available at fine bookstores everywhere, Amazon included, I'm sure. I can't wait for the next one. Yeah, is Real Deal 2 in progress already, or is that on the
no,
whiteboard?
no, we're standing down on the writing front for a little bit.
Yeah, I
So
hear you. Yeah, it
but
takes a lot out of you,
happy
doesn't
to
it?
have this one up and running, and initial reports are people are enjoying it. So I'm happy for that.
Okay. All right. Joe McNally, thank you so much. Nikon Ambassador Extraordinaire, The Real Deal on This Week in Photo. Thanks, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Frederick. Honored to be invited.
This is TWiP. This episode was sponsored by MPB, the world's largest online platform for used photo and video kit. Visit mpb.com.